I'm Tim Ventura, and we're joined today by Robert Powell, Executive Board Member and Founding Member of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. Robert has been studying the UAP phenomena since 2007, and prior to the SEU has served as Director of Research at MUFON and creator of MUFON's Science Review Board. Robert is the co-author of a detailed 600-page book on the history of the phenomenon, UFOs and Government, a Historical Inquiry, and author of the children's educational book, The Truth About UFOs, a Scientific Perspective. He's also the author of numerous papers on the 2008 Stephenville, Texas case, the 2013 Aguadilla, Puerto Rico video, and the 2004 Nimitz encounter. Robert has a bachelor's degree in chemistry and 28 years of experience in engineering management in the semiconductor industry, along with work at Advanced Micro Devices, helping develop its first flash memory technology. He's also managed state-of-the-art chemistry labs, R&D groups, and is the co-holder of 4 patents related to nanotech. So, Robert, welcome. It is a true pleasure and honor to have you with me today, sir.
Well, hi, Tim. It's good to be with you again.
So today we are talking about your upcoming book, UFOs, A Scientist Explains What We Know and Don't Know. And I'm going to preface that by saying I'm going to put links to all 3 of your books in the show notes, so people watching this on YouTube can scroll down and get those. But I want to jump right in and ask if you can give us a brief overview of what the new book is about and what inspired you to write it.
Sure. I'll start with your last part of your question first. I was inspired because this book really represents my 17 years of study of this subject. So it includes everything I've learned from talking to hundreds of witnesses in person, as well as having read literally thousands of reports on UFOs/UAP, whichever term we choose to use. So this book encompasses that, and it's written so that anyone should be able to enjoy the book, whether it's someone who is steeped in the UFO subject or someone who really has not read much about UFOs. I think it will appeal to either audience. And probably the 2 key things that the book points out, and this is what I've learned from having studied this subject for 17 years. The first is that UFOs or UAP are an actual physical object in our atmosphere. It's not just a ball of fire or a phenomenon of some type. And the second is that it is intelligently controlled by something that's much more advanced intelligence than us. Beyond that, I can't draw a conclusion as to where it comes from or its intent or anything else. But that are the 2 pieces of data that I've concluded after 17 years of study. And the book takes the reader from the beginning with some basic history of our government, how it's operated, some of the key cases that have happened over history. And then it goes to an explanation of why I believe this is not just a figment of our imagination and why I believe it's real. And I go through different examples and situations such as extreme acceleration, electromagnetic interference, actual bending of light sometimes has been reported. And from there I move into how academia reacts to the problem, how we need to react in the future, how our government has reacted, how we as individuals have reacted, and then I talk about the extraterrestrial hypothesis is a possible hypothesis to discuss an answer to the UFO UAP subject. And then I end it with where we need to go next. If we really want to solve this riddle, what's that next step?
Well, and so I have been reading through this, and you are definitely taking a new school approach, and you're merging the latest science and technology and astronomy research and a lot of the new UAP research into this existing framework, right? So I would definitely recommend that people check this book out. Now, in terms of books, you've written two others on the UFO topic in the past. I do want to touch on those. There's UFOs and Government, Historical Inquiry, and again, that is a massive 600-page tome that really brings people up to speed on this. And then there was The Truth About UFOs, A Scientific Perspective, which was the children's book. So again, links in the show notes to those. So what would you say makes this book different than those, especially given the depth that you went into in UFOs and Government?
Well, UFOs and Government, it goes in depth into the history of the government and the history of some specific cases. So it's more of a history book, and it's an excellent reference book. While the children's book is really geared towards children in the age of 10 to 15 years old, who, what I try to do is give them a scientific perspective of the subject. So, I go through things such as anything you see in the sky for that first nanosecond or split second, your brain doesn't know what it is until it classifies it, right, as a fly or a bird or what have you. And of course, a true UFO is something we never classify because we can never get an answer to it, which is why we call it unknown. So that's kind of where those two books went, their direction. This book is more of what is the overall encompassing book of why I believe that UFOs are a physical entity that exists and why I believe they're intelligently controlled. So that's kind of the difference. UFOs and Government, we didn't really talk about whether or not they were, intelligently controlled or not. It was more just pure history. Well, this is my view based on everything I've studied.
Well, so you have a couple of surprises in this book, and one of them is listed on the book jacket, so I think it's okay to at least touch on it. The book includes never before released information indicating that the U.S. government possesses not just 2 videos, but 5 videos from 2015 of UFOs operating in the vicinity of the USS Roosevelt nuclear aircraft carrier. Could you characterize those videos for us briefly?
Yes, I could do that for you, Tim. So let me kind of step back for a moment, though, and say I suspect that maybe some of our congressmen may have seen some of these videos that I was told about. And the reason I say that is Chuck Schumer, who's the head of the United States Senate, actually sponsored the most recent UAP legislation. And as we all know, a politician does not sponsor something that has the stigma of UFO or UAP unless they know something and feel comfortable doing so, right? Especially the head of the Democratic Party in the Senate. So let me tell the audience a little bit about how I know this information is valid. In December 17th, of 2017, the New York Times comes out with these 2 new videos, right? And they, on the front page, they're talking about UFOs and UAP. Well, within a month of that, I get a call from a U.S. serviceman who is also an officer. And he says, hey, I've seen some of your work. I wanted to tell you something about those videos. And he said, the one from 2004? He goes, I don't know anything about that. Never seen that video. But the video from 2015 from the USS Roosevelt, well, I know there are 4 other videos besides that one because I saw them all. And so at that moment, I'm like, okay, is this guy pulling my leg? Did he really? Right? So he describes the videos. One of the videos he describes is a video that came out 1 year later. It was called Go Fast, was the nickname the video was given. So I knew a year later when I saw Go Fast come out that this guy was telling me the truth because that's one of the videos he described to me before it was released. Well, what's interesting is he describes another video, which he made the statement, this video will never be released. And I'm sure he's probably correct. But on this video, an F-18 has an infrared image of an object that's rapidly approaching him. And he said basically it looks like a large ball of light in the infrared video. And he said there's also radar data in the bottom corner of the video, so you can see the object on radar as well as you visually see it approach. He said it's approaching the jet. The pilot turns on his missile dummies. In other words, they've got a dummy missile, but he's able to use his radar to lock on the object. So he's locked a missile onto the object. And at the moment the pilot locks the missile on the object zips off just like you took a laser beam and just moved it across the wall that you were shining it all. And it moves that rapidly and is gone off the screen. So that's one of the videos that will probably never be released.
Well, so I have one of my sources actually is in the Department of Defense, and he got bit by the bug, so to speak, and went on his own kind of research quest. And in his case, he's very high up. He got clearance to look at a lot of the material that is currently classified. And he didn't give me details, but he told me that there are also other videos that have been found and basically just compiled, and that's something that research is being done on. But again, he wasn't super specific about, what there might be. So he could have been talking about these as well. So let me get into UAP in a little bit more detail. We are all familiar with the 5 observables: sudden and instantaneous acceleration, hypersonic velocities without signatures, low observability, transmedium travel, and positive lift, right? Those are kind of the 5 classic observables that, have been in the news. Others are calling biological effects a sixth observable. I'm not sure if that's entirely true. And in the book, you touch on electromagnetic interference, bending light, as you just mentioned, and a lack of obvious propulsion mechanisms. Can we rework the observables into a larger, more comprehensive description of this phenomenon?
Yeah, my view of those observables, Tim, has always been a little different than what you normally hear. I really see it as 2 basic observables. The one is the extreme acceleration, because the amount of acceleration we see is the amount required to basically accelerate an object into interstellar travel, because the acceleration you see can reach light speeds within a day. So that to me is one of the key components. The other key component, which encompasses a lot of these other 5 observables, is the fact that whatever medium the craft is in, it's not interacting with that medium. So there's no sonic boom, there's no heating of the atmosphere, there's no movement of the atmosphere where a witness says it was right next to me, it took off at extreme speed, and there was no wind, right? So to me, those are the 2 components that are distinctly different than anything that we're capable of manufacturing today, right? We don't have the ability to accelerate at extreme speeds, and whatever we manufacture, it interacts with our atmosphere.
Okay. Well, in the new book, you make the case that it is time for a change of approach in the study of UFOs. You've written, the phenomena has been with us for 75 years, and we've learned very little as the decades have passed. I would completely agree that UFOs have been in this no man's land of a stalemate between believers and skeptics. What do you propose in terms of change that can move the actual science forward?
Right. So during these 75 years, the organization that we have that has been monitoring UFOs, right, and has been involved has always been the military.
Yeah.
And we beat our head against the wall for 75 years. And in my mind, it's time to move and take that role away from the military and give that role to academia and the scientific community. Because the military's role is centered around national security. And if what we're dealing with is something that's an intelligence beyond us, right, then in my view, national security is no longer the key component. Instead, it needs to go to the scientific community, because anything that advanced, it really, to be honest, isn't going to matter what we do if it has a malevolent intent. But all indications are that it's benevolent and does not have a, an ulterior motive or a a bad intent. Now, I could always be wrong, right? Just because nothing's happened in 75 years doesn't mean something might not happen tomorrow. But that's not my view of the situation based on all the research and studying I've done over the last 17 years. So I think, to answer your question, take it out of the hands of the military, put it in the hands of science.
Well, and overall, I agree with that. But, I'm going to jump around in my questions a little bit. I had this one further down. The Fermi paradox was inspired by a cartoon in the New Yorker showing UFO aliens abducting trash cans in New York City back in the 1950s. And that prompted Enrico Fermi to ask, where is everybody? Now, the cartoon itself is saying they're here, and yet he is looking at that saying, where are they? That leads me to wonder if this isn't an example of the scientific community wearing blinders to this phenomenon, and how can we get them to take, I guess, an honest look at it and leave some of those preconceptions behind.
Yeah, as simple as it might seem to answer the Fermi question, there's actually a lot of components that go into that and why we have such a difficulty with this subject. So in my mind, it's like the cartoon. They are here. By here, what I mean is they have moved through our atmosphere and have, I would assume, have observed us. But so for your audience, let me take them back a step. Today we know that there are thousands of exoplanets, right? And we even have an organization called SETI, which is completely fine with the concept that we have life out there in the stars. And there, in the terminology we use now, is called a technosignature. What is the technosignature that we would see on an exoplanet that indicates there's intelligent life? So, for example, maybe it's that on the dark side of the planet, you have light being emitted, right? That would be an indication of a technical signature of life. And there are even academic papers on what if we had technosignatures in our solar system, like observation posts. There have been papers written on that. But as soon as you bring the technosignature into our atmosphere, it becomes like a no-no. You can't talk about it, right? And that's just a psychological and sociological reaction of us to the concept that what if you have something that's far more in advance than you? Then that means you're really not in control at that point in time, right? As long as it's far away, it's okay. But if you bring it closer, there is this, I think it's in our psychology, in the way we're formed, that we resist contemplating such a thing. But I think times are changing, and I think the younger generations are open to looking at this.
Well, and you are making so many important points about this. Now, going to this new approach to studying UFOs, the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, which you helped co-found in 2017, has an absolutely impeccable reputation for dispassionate analysis and has produced a number of detailed papers that have been well received by both UFO enthusiasts and scientific skeptics alike. So, what is it that this SCU is doing right, and what are the guidelines that you would urge others to use to follow down that path?
So our mission, the key to the SCU, is that it's the scientific exploration of the UAP subject. So we use the scientific method, we endorse the scientific method on everything we do. And to kind of give you the audience a feel for this, the SCU was founded in 2017. So today, 7 years later, we have over 300 members, And those members, 30% of them have PhDs, and more than half have either a PhD or a master's degree. So what that tells you is that this subject, the stigma is starting to go away, and the scientific community is interested, and they are willing to investigate it. So it's not that the world of science says, oh, UFOs are definitely, you know, an advanced intelligence, although I personally believe that. But it means that they are willing to investigate it and make that determination on their own, right? And try to verify whether or not they believe, like my stance, that it is an intelligence that's in the atmosphere. So that's one of the things that the SCU is doing. The other thing is we're a 501c3, so we use business practices to move forward, and we grew slowly. We did not want to, we intentionally made sure that we didn't grow so fast that the organization would just implode. So I think that's probably a key thing that all organizations should do is make sure you maintain the structure of the organization as you grow.
Ah, well, now, in contrast to the SCU, I do want to touch on the recent AARO Historical Report, which received widespread criticism for a number of scientific and historical inaccuracies, as well as the claim that it, quote unquote, found no evidence of extraterrestrial technology or crash recovery. You wrote a detailed criticism of this report yourself on Twitter. So let me ask, where did they fail and how can they do better in the future?
Okay, yeah, I'll talk about, where the AARO report failed. But if we just step back and just look at the big picture of what has happened, the AARO group has only existed for 18 months,
Yeah.
and they have not even been active for 18 months. Myself and other individuals have studied this subject for 15, 20, 25 years. It's almost not fair to expect someone who's only been exposed to the subject for a matter of months to write a report that really has a lot of meat in the report. So, but to look at the report specifically, I mean, what one gross failure that when I was in the university, your paper would never even have been read with these kind of errors. There are 45 broken links in the paper, so 45 references that you cannot even find. And then there's 40 references that all it says is see UAP files at AARO, right, which no one can access. Well, in science, it's not a reference if no one can access it. So the paper just fails immediately.
Yeah.
But then when you go through the paper, it has incorrect dates, it has the wrong name for organizations, it makes statements that are completely incorrect. That, for example, the year 1960 was a year where there were a lot of UFO sightings. Totally incorrect, and it's just laden with those type of errors. And so you go through the paper, you find all these things. It has other errors like a statement that the Manhattan Project and other national laboratories caused a spike in UFO reports in the United States. Well, that's crazy. I mean, the Manhattan Project existed before UFOs were even reported on the continental United States.
Yeah.
So I just can't imagine how these kind of errors got made. Clearly, no one proofread this paper, and clearly it certainly didn't go through any type of peer review. But the key thing that the paper hangs its hat on is the statement that we found no evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence. So in science, before you can make any statement, you have to say, well, what's your definition of terms, right? So before I can say there is or is not evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence, what is the evidence I need to make that statement? Well, the AARO report never tells you. So we have no idea. We don't know if they defined extraterrestrial intelligence as having a dead alien body in front of them, or a captured spacecraft, or something not so obvious, right? So in science, those two that I just mentioned is not what you would have defined as your evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence, right? You would It would be like those techno signatures that I indicated earlier. For example, do we have evidence of accelerations by a craft in the atmosphere well beyond our capabilities? That's what I would define as evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence, something like that, not a undefined term and then making a statement such as that you haven't even defined.
Okay. Well, in terms of AARO and the government, and again, all of this, I guess, all of the conflict and stalemate that exists, I want to get into that a little bit. Pew Research currently shows public trust in government at near record lows of 16%. And the AARO historical record itself admits that many people believe the government hasn't been truthful regarding knowledge of extraterrestrial craft. So the organization, I think, as we all know, has very limited time, staffing, and expertise. As you've mentioned, they've only been in existence for about 18 months. It seems to me that they just don't have the tools, time, and labor to really be able to study this effectively. And I've wondered if their time might not be better served by working with and potentially coordinating research by existing organizations such as the SCU or JIPON in France and the many others that are out there and have been out there doing solid science.
I agree with you completely, Tim. As a matter of fact, the SCU reached out to AARO at two different times and never received a response from them. So AARO never, reached out to any of the scientific based organizations, except I believe the Galileo Project. They reached out briefly, to that organization. But they did not reach out to us. I was at a meeting with JIPON, which is the French space organization that researches UAP and UFOs. And NASA actually had an appearance at that meeting, but not AARO.
Mm.
So I think they probably had too much on their plate to be able to handle, to really do the job properly. And that's why you really need the scientific world and academia, right? Because you need a lot of people all over the country working on this issue, which means you have to have funding to allow that, to happen.
Okay. Well, so I want to come back to the extraterrestrial hypothesis. If UFOs are extraterrestrial, as you and I both personally believe, there have been worries that this could lead to a national panic like Orson Welles' War of the Worlds broadcast created. Now, the June 2021 ODNI preliminary assessment on UAP boldly stated that UAP clearly pose a safety of flight issue and may pose a challenge to U.S. national security. And when that came out, the general public hardly blinked. So I'm wondering if that could be an indicator that after 75 years of media exposure to UFOs, we are ready as a society to accept the extraterrestrial hypothesis.
Yeah, I think, and I believe it was a Pew study, which when it looked at the acceptance of the likelihood that an extraterrestrial, you know, civilization might contact us in the future, the younger generations have a much higher acceptance rate for that than the older generations. So I think as time has progressed, and the real big change, I think, is all of the exoplanets we discovered. I believe we're at close to 6,000 exoplanets. So 30 years ago and 40 years ago, when this subject was discussed, there had not been a single exoplanet discussed. Many people were not even sure that there were other planets around stars. There was always that feeling that we were unique, right? And this is the only place. But of course, today we know that's not the case. So as we discover more and more, and the number of exoplanets out there in my opinion, is far more than 6,000. That's limited by the techniques that we use to see another solar system. For example, if you took our solar system and put it 20 light years away, the Earth, we could not, with our current technology, detect the Earth. We would see a star, which we might detect Jupiter, or we might not detect anything, right? And that's all we would know about this solar system if it was out 20 light years away. So the actual number of exoplanets is far beyond the 6,000 we've discovered. So that tells us that life is ubiquitous to the universe. It's just everywhere.
I tend to agree with that. I did an interview with Dr. Robert Zubrin, who had said that the four most plentiful elements are carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and helium. And of course, helium doesn't react with anything, but those other three really form the basis for life, right? So it's very likely that with those exoplanets, especially being in the habitable zone, a lot of them have chemistry just like ours. And I tend to believe that life is all over the galaxy. And then there is another aspect to this, I think. The scientific community tends to balk at this idea that ET may have found us because of the speed of light limit, right? And that may not necessarily be a limit. Different people are proposing warp drives that could potentially get around that. But another premise was put forward by Dr. Kevin Newth on the SCU staff that even traveling below the speed of light, ET may have been here for thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of years. And so it's not necessarily that they would pick up our radio signals and use a warp drive to get here. They may have found us long, long ago, right? So.
Right. And that's also the theory on some papers that have talked about technosignatures within our own solar system. The concept that another civilization might have sent some type of craft or observational post into our solar system, maybe tens to hundreds of thousands of years ago, maybe even millions, and they would be probably AI or robotic type systems that might stop like on the asteroid or on the moon or wherever, and just basically observe the Earth from those locations. So yeah, that's you don't have to be able to exceed the speed of light to travel interstellar. There's a lot of engineering requirements that you need, but the 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 advantage you get as you approach the speed of light is that time slows down. So if you're capable of engineering a vehicle that travels just below the speed of light, the occupants within the vehicle will not age compared to us, right? So time slows down until it basically stops at the speed of light. So that means they could come from 10,000 light years away, where it takes light 10,000 years to get here. So it's 10,000 years as far as we're concerned. But for the occupants of the craft, it could have been seconds or minutes or hours, depending on how close they are to the speed of light.
Yeah. Well, and again, that's assuming that these are true biological entities piloting these. One of the hypotheses that I've been excited about is this idea of von Neumann probes. And in that case, a lot of these restrictions on travel just disappear. You have these self-replicating probes that could literally be filling the galaxy. They could be living in the ocean, not living, but existing in the ocean, pulling elements out of seawater to self-replicate. And they, at least, would be entirely consistent with what we've seen with Tic Tac, although not necessarily other reports. So there are so many different potential ways that this could come about, right? That, again, this
Right.
goes to just opening our minds to it, I think.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to do. And I wanted to touch back on something you asked him about, the concern people have, and where I mentioned that the younger generations are not as concerned about whether or not we someday meet an extraterrestrial life form. And that's this basic concept that as a civilization anywhere develops, right, it develops the ability to annihilate itself before it develops the ability for interstellar travel. So just take our own civilization. We developed the ability to annihilate ourselves almost 70 years ago, while interstellar travel is at least another 70 years away, if not farther. So the key concept here is that a civilization that's aggressive, which you might classify ours as aggressive, as you read the newspapers every morning, that type of civilization will likely annihilate itself before it ever obtains interstellar travel. And the choice for a civilization is to become more benign and not aggressive, right? If it's going to survive long enough to develop interstellar travel. So the final view is that it's most likely any civilization traveling between the stars is not a malevolent civilization. It's more likely to be a more peaceful type civilization. So hopefully that's the case, but you never know for sure.
Absolutely. Well, Robert, on that note, let me thank you so much for your time today. We've covered a lot of different material. And again, I want to recommend that people take a look at the book, UFOs, A Scientist Explains What We Know and Don't Know. I have links to that in the show notes. Let me close by asking what is coming up for you in the next few months? The book is just coming out now. So where are you going after this? And what do you expect to see in the UAP narrative over the next few months as well?
Well, coming up actually for SCU on May 31st to June 2nd will be the SCU annual conference, which this year will again be held in Huntsville, Alabama at the Space Rocket Center there. And anyone who's interested in attending, they can attend either in real person in Huntsville, or they can attend virtually through the internet because we have some excellent software that allows them to interact with the conference. And any information they want can be found on our website, which is at explorescu.org. And I would urge everyone to attend our conference. It's we have, I believe, 6 to 8 different PhDs, who will talk in a language that we can all understand. And so it should be, a great conference. As to what I see coming up in the world of UAP and UFOs, is I see a continued increase in academia and the scientific community interacting with the subject and studying the subject, which I think is a key thing that needs to happen. And the second thing that I think we'll continue to see happen is Congress becoming more and more involved in the study or in the discussion of this subject.
Wonderful. Thank you again so much for your time today, sir.
Thank you, Tim.